Snow drifted across London like a pale shroud, softening the clipped edges of the city and casting every rooftop in a muted glow, as if the world itself were holding its breath. Carriages rattled along the slick cobblestones, lantern light trembling against the fog, and gossip, London's most persistent companion, fluttered like invisible wings around the capital. Within this restless winter, Lady Marianne Ashcombe moved with a poise so quiet and disciplined that it often surprised those who witnessed it. She had learned, over the past year, that dignity could be both armor and refuge. At 24, she possessed a calm steadiness admired by many but understood by few, for beneath the soft composure lingered an ache she rarely permitted even herself to acknowledge. Marianne entered Carlton House at Princess Charlotte's side, the grand marble hall echoing with the rustle of silk and the faint hum of anticipation. Lights spilled from ornate chandeliers overhead, their crystal shards splintering the glow into delicate prisms that danced upon the walls. Tonight's winter assembly marked the unofficial beginning of the season, and nobility had arrived in their finest, eager to observe who might falter, who might rise, and who might be devoured by the merciless tide of society's attention. Marianne's gloved hands folded demurely before her as she walked, her head gently inclined, her dark hair gathered in a style elegant yet reserved. She had become an expert at appearing untouched. Yet whispers trailed her footsteps, subtle as a draught yet sharp as a blade. A pair of young countesses watched her pass and exchanged meaningful glances. "They say he has returned," one murmured, her voice low but not low enough. "After abandoning her so completely." The other suppressed a smirk. "Some men travel the world to escape their mistakes," she said, the words slicing neatly through the space between them. Marianne continued forward as though she had heard nothing, though her pulse flickered beneath her bodice. She would not allow the past to stain this evening, nor give those who delighted in cruelty the satisfaction of seeing her flinch. It had been a year, a long, merciless year, since Duke Henry Whitmore had ended their courtship with a coldness that still haunted her dreams. He had cited necessity, his family's obligations, the weight of politics pressing upon his shoulders. But no explanation, no matter how rational, could soften the humiliation of being cast aside by the man she had once believed would stand beside her. And so she had rebuilt what he broke, piece by piece, until her quiet resolve became its own kind of strength. Inside the grand ballroom, music unfurled in gentle waves, violins weaving through the warm hum of conversation. Gilded columns framed the space, and bouquets of winter roses perfumed the air with a subtle, wistful sweetness. Marianne positioned herself behind Princess Charlotte, attending to her duties with meticulous grace. She murmured responses when addressed, smiled when expected, and stood perfectly still when the princess paused to greet foreign dignitaries. Even in stillness, she felt the familiar prickle of judgment grazing across her shoulders. Some pitied her, believing her heart irreparably wounded. Others merely watched, waiting for something, anything, to crack her composure. The night might have continued in this ordinary discomfort, had the ballroom doors not erupted open with a sudden gust of cold air. A hush swept through the crowd as if the very walls had breathed in sharply. Music faltered, the bow of the lead violinist trembling mid-stroke. Heads turned in unison, curiosity rising like a tide. Marianne, though she sensed the shift instantly, did not turn at first. She steadied her breath, unsure whether she feared the truth or the memory of it. Then she heard his name hissed through the gathered nobles. "The Duke! Whitmore! He's returned!" A ripple of astonishment traveled through the crowd, and Marianne finally allowed herself to look. Duke Henry Whitmore stood framed by the doorway, snow melting into darkened droplets upon the shoulders of his coat. At 28, he carried the bearing of someone accustomed to command yet humbled by distance, his expression carved with exhaustion and something more elusive, regret. His gaze swept through the ballroom, searching, almost frantic beneath its facade of control. And then it landed on her. It was as if the world narrowed into a single thread between them. Candlelight flickered across his features, shading the hollows of his cheeks, softening the curve of his mouth. Marianne felt the ground shift beneath her, yet she held herself perfectly still. His eyes widened, not with surprise, but with a painful recognition of everything he had forfeited. The room fell silent, breathless. He stepped forward, boots echoing softly against the marble floor. Nobles parted for him instinctively, as though sensing a moment they had no right to interrupt. Marianne's fingers curled against her skirt, her heartbeat a steady drum beneath her ribs. She would not tremble. She would not allow him to unravel the strength she had worked so diligently to restore. When he reached her, he bowed with formal precision. "Lady Marianne," he said, his voice low, careful, almost reverent. "You look well." She curtsied with flawless grace, her face serene. "Your Grace," she replied, her tone perfectly polite. "London seems unchanged in your absence." A faint, rueful smile touched his lips. "And yet I find myself changed entirely." Before she could respond, he reached into his coat and withdrew a small object, her embroidered handkerchief, the one she had given him long before he shattered her trust. His fingers brushed hers as he returned it, and though the touch lasted barely a second, it struck her like a tremor. Murmurs erupted instantly among the onlookers. Marianne closed her hand around the handkerchief, concealing it against the folds of her gown. The whispers swelled, eager, hungry, delighted by the scent of scandal. She stepped back instinctively, her composure tightening like a corset. Princess Charlotte glanced toward her with a subtle warning in her eyes, one that said more than words could. "Be careful. The court is watching." Marianne inclined her head, signaling that she understood. Yet as Henry held her gaze, earnest and unguarded in a way she had never seen before, something unfamiliar fluttered in her chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faint tremor of a story beginning again, against her will. And though the moment ended as quickly as it had begun, the room remained suspended in its aftermath, as if the night itself had shifted course. For the first time in a year, Marianne felt the fragile tremble of possibility, and the peril that came with it. London awoke the next morning with a singular appetite, the return of Duke Henry Whitmore. Newspapers devoted discreet columns to his unexpected reappearance, though the true stories swelled in the parlors and drawing-rooms, passed from fan to whispering fan. Lady Marianne Ashcombe's name appeared beside his in nearly every murmur. By noon, she understood with icy clarity that the handkerchief he returned had ignited a speculation she could neither control nor silence. Even within the royal residence, where decorum reigned above curiosity, she caught lingering glances that pressed like invisible fingers against her composure. The world had waited an entire year to reopen a wound she had fought to close. She tried to bury herself in her duties beside Princess Charlotte, but distraction trailed her like a shadow. Every errand, every conversation, carried an undertone of scrutiny. A visiting baroness paused mid-curtsy to ask if the Duke's arrival had unsettled her. A gentleman inquired whether she had kept correspondence with his Grace while he was abroad, a notion so absurd she could only answer with a polite, strained smile. It astonished her how quickly society had decided she was once again an object of intrigue. She had not chosen this tether. It had been placed around her without permission. That afternoon, as she returned from delivering a letter on Princess Charlotte's behalf, Marianne found a small box resting upon her writing desk. No servant claimed to have left it. The seal bore no crest, only a wax impression of a primrose, delicate, understated, easily overlooked unless one knew its meaning. Her breath caught. She opened the box with careful fingers and beheld a single winter primrose, pale and tender despite the season's cruelty. A folded note lay beneath it. "For the hope I once abandoned and now seek to restore." Henry's handwriting had not changed. It remained steady, elegant, unhurried, like a man thinking through every word. Marianne pressed the note shut as if it burned. She could not bring herself to destroy it, yet she could not bear to leave it in the open either. She tucked the box into the drawer and closed it with a decisive snap. A flower was nothing more than a gesture of remembrance, she told herself, and remembrance was a luxury she could not afford. That evening, she accompanied Princess Charlotte to a charity tea hosted at the Duchess of York's residence. The gathering brimmed with polite smiles stretched too tightly, a room thick with nobles who lived for the currency of scandal. Marianne entered with the princess and felt the curious hum intensify instantly. Ordinarily, such attention would fade once the crowd settled, but tonight it clung to her like burrs. When Henry arrived 20 minutes later, the hum sharpened into a collective intake of breath. He crossed the room not toward the Duchess, nor toward his political acquaintances, but directly to Marianne. His confidence, though measured, carried a clarity that made the surrounding guests lean in subtly. Marianne bowed her head in greeting, her voice neutral as she offered the appropriate courtesies. "Your Grace, I trust the evening finds you well. It finds me where I most wish to be, he replied quietly, though the room heard him. I feared you might avoid me. I avoid no one, she said with practiced steadiness. But I do not wish for complications. Then allow me to simplify them. His gaze softened. I would simply speak with you. His boldness unsettled her. Boldness had not been his nature a year ago. Back then, he had bowed to pressure, to family, to political expedience. Now, he stood before her as if nothing in the world held greater urgency than her willingness to listen. But the room's hunger for spectacle pressed against her skin. Your Grace, she murmured, this is neither the place nor the moment. Then grant me another. The murmur of surrounding voices swelled, and Marianne felt heat creep into her collar. She excused herself swiftly under the pretense of retrieving a shawl. What she sought, however, was a breath of air unpolluted by scrutiny. She stepped outside into the courtyard, where a drizzle had begun threading the cold air with a silvery mist. Servants scurried to cover chairs and extinguish lanterns, and a footman hurried to summon her carriage. Before she could reach it, Henry appeared beneath the archway, rain speckling his coat. His voice was low, urgent. Please do not walk away. Not again. Not without hearing me. Your Grace, she said, keeping her chin high, you have already caused enough murmuring for one evening. If they must whisper, he said, stepping closer, let them whisper the truth. I returned for you, Marianne. The rain softened the world into a blur of muted lanterns and shimmering stone. Marianne, caught between escape and confrontation, spoke through tightening breath. You returned because it suited you, now, after a year of silence. I returned because I could no longer bear the consequence of leaving. His words trembled with weight. May I speak with you alone? Only for a moment. I owe you an explanation. The sincerity in his voice pulled at her resolve. She nodded once, and he guided her toward a small garden pavilion just beyond the courtyard, a structure dimly lit, its wooden lattice glistening with rain. Inside, the air held the scent of damp stone and lingering roses. Henry remained near the entrance, as though afraid to imprison her. My family told me I must end our courtship, he began, for the sake of an alliance they believed vital. They saw affection as a liability. They saw you as, he hesitated, as someone who could not secure their ambitions. Marianne stiffened. And you agreed. I obeyed, he corrected softly, because I lacked the courage to defy them. And I despise myself for it every day. Marianne's voice shook with long-buried pain. You left me to face humiliation alone. Do you understand what that year cost me? His expression broke with remorse. I do now. And I will carry that fault for the rest of my life. But I swear to you, Marianne, nothing in that year gave me peace. I thought of you constantly. I thought of the future I destroyed with my own cowardice. She turned away, gripping the edge of a stone bench to steady herself. His confession pressed heavy against her heart, too raw, too sudden. She had prayed for these words once. Now they unsettled her more than his silence ever had. Words cannot mend everything, she whispered. No, he said gently. But they may begin to. When she stepped past him toward the exit, unsure whether she felt restored or newly fractured, she reached for her glove and discovered the embroidered handkerchief missing again. Her breath hitched. Somehow, he had taken it without her noticing. Or perhaps she had surrendered it without knowing. The realization lingered with her as she left the pavilion, the rain cooling her skin and her certainty. For the first time since his return, she did not know whether the ground beneath her was firm, or shifting beneath her feet. The weeks that followed Henry's confession unfolded like the slow, deliberate turn of a page, each day measured, restrained, yet charged with an unspoken current. Society, never idle, speculated with feverish delight. Rumors whispered that Henry sought another bride, one suited for political expedience, while Marianne endured the sting of uncertainty and expectation. She performed her duties with unerring grace beside Princess Charlotte, but the quiet spaces between courtesies became chambers of reflection, where her thoughts traced the lines of that rainy confession, clinging to both the hope and the peril it offered. Every flutter of the handkerchief she carried reminded her that affection alone could not undo the weight of ambition, nor silence the scrutiny that trailed their every step. One evening, at a musical soirée hosted within the gilded walls of Lady Pembroke's residence, Henry arrived without fanfare, his presence commanding the room in subtle, deliberate measure. The chandeliers caught the gold in his hair, and the hush of recognition spread among the attendees like ripples across still water. He did not mingle with those eager to curry favor or satisfy curiosity. His eyes sought only Marianne. The gathering seemed to bend around him, yielding to a magnetic truth no societal pretense could deny. Marianne felt her pulse quicken despite herself, the echo of the garden pavilion lingering like a shadow in the marrow of her resolve. When he approached her, the world seemed to tilt, as though their past missteps, whispered judgments, and lingering grievances converged into a single point of gravity. "Lady Marianne," he said, his voice carrying above the murmur of polite conversation, "I have returned not for fortune, nor for favor, but for the one lady whose good opinion I have sought all this time. And she stands before me." Heads turned, breath caught. The air held its own counsel, as if even the walls demanded attention to this declaration. Marianne's fingers twined nervously with the edge of her gown. The elegance of her composure faltered for the briefest moment, betrayed by a quiver of her lips and a shadow across her eyes. "Your Grace," she replied, deliberately low, "there are many who will read meaning into words not meant for them. Consider the prudence of discretion." Yet the tremor in her tone belied the force of emotion she fought to conceal. She had learned, over the past months, that restraint was both shield and torment. She would not grant Henry the satisfaction of triumphing with ease. He inclined his head, eyes earnest, the faintest curve of a smile touching his lips, not with triumph but with reverence. "Then I shall risk discretion for truth," he murmured. "If the world overhears, it shall hear that I have come not to play games, but to seek what I abandoned in cowardice. I return to claim nothing but your trust, if you would grant it." The words, tender and resolute, brushed against the invisible chains of her hesitation. The night pressed on, the music weaving between their conversation like a gentle current, but the murmurs of society faded from Marianne's consciousness. They moved together to the lantern-lit gallery, where the polished floor reflected the glow of crystal and candlelight, and the air smelled faintly of polished wood and winter roses. Here, removed from immediate scrutiny, the weight of what had been deferred for a year pressed upon them, shaping their interaction with urgency and delicate reverence. Marianne spoke first, her voice quivering just enough to betray the storm she contained. "I feared, Your Grace, that a year of silence meant you had chosen indifference over affection, that what I cherished most had been deemed inconsequential." Each word was measured, deliberate, yet the tremor beneath them suggested she had not entirely mastered her restraint. Henry's gaze softened, the line of his jaw shifting with regret and longing alike. "I have no words adequate to the fault I committed," he said quietly. "But I am here, and I am resolved. I would spend the rest of my days proving that my return is no act of convenience, but of contrition and devotion." A moment of fragile quiet settled between them, the kind that spoke more loudly than any music or conversation ever could. Marianne's hands fell to her sides, the tension in her shoulders slowly easing, yet she did not smile. Words, however heartfelt, are insufficient. Proof demands action, not declaration. Henry inclined his head, understanding the depth of her meaning. He extended his hand subtly, a silent entreaty not of ownership, but of partnership, of willingness to bear the past and future together. Later, in the garden behind the gallery, snow began to fall softly, brushing the dark evergreens with white. Lanterns hung along the paths, casting warm circles of light upon the frozen ground. Henry took her hand then, gently, and led her to a small clearing where no eyes but their own observed. He knelt, the snow settling lightly on his shoulders, the crystals melting into damp strands of hair, yet his gaze never wavered. The gesture, humble and profound, carried all the weight of apology, courage, and hope. "Marianne," he said, voice steady despite the tremor of cold or emotion, "the world I built without you is one I cannot bear. Allow me the honor of building the next beside you. I choose you, not for convenience, not for appearance, but for the life we might forge together, should you consent." Tears pricked Marianne's eyes, not from weakness but from the culmination of a year's worth of restraint, longing, and heartbreak. The snow fell around them in soft sheets, muffling the city's ceaseless murmur, and for a moment, only the two of them existed, suspended in a world that had once been cruel and indifferent. Her answer came not in words, but in the gentle interlacing of her fingers with his, the subtle inclination of her head that conveyed both acceptance and cautious hope. She allowed herself to breathe, finally, in the warmth of mutual understanding, even as the night remained hushed with witness. The return to Carlton House for the remaining hours of the evening carried a different weight. Whispers still followed, yet they no longer carried the sting of judgment. Those who speculated caught only fragments of what had transpired, a subtle bow, a shared glance, a hand held just long enough to speak volumes. Marianne walked beside Henry with grace and tact, but with a new, imperceptible ease that spoke of tentative trust reclaimed. Society, as it always did, would continue its scrutiny, but its sharpness dulled in the face of truth. Love, finally acknowledged and reciprocated, had the power to render gossip impotent. By the following weeks, Henry's dedication proved constant and unwavering. He accompanied Marianne in public and private with equal attention to propriety and affection. No grand declarations beyond what she could bear, no flaunting of sentiment for the world's amusement. Society slowly adjusted, its appetite for scandal tempered by the visible harmony between two individuals who had endured separation, misunderstanding, and whispered censure. Marianne, once a lady haunted by past humiliation, found in Henry not only contrition and courage but a steadfast presence that allowed her dignity to flourish once more. And so, in the winter of 1817, beneath chandeliers glittering like captured stars in snow that softened the harsh angles of London streets, two hearts reunited not through spectacle, nor through convenience, but through the slow, deliberate reclamation of trust and hope.